I believe the Federal Reserve is clueless and tariffs don't cause inflation. And I'm going to back up what I'm saying here with objective facts and data. First of all, this is Ben Bernanke. He was the Fed chair during the global financial crisis. In 2015, he said this: "When I was at the Fed, I occasionally observed that monetary policy is 98% talk and only 2% action. The ability to shape market expectations of future policy through public statements is one of the most powerful tools the Fed has." The downside for policymakers, of course, is that the cost of sending the wrong message can be high. So what is he saying here? Well, he's saying that he's just trying to manipulate you through public statements to make you believe that things aren't as bad as they are. Okay? So here's the FOMC, which had almost 49,000 viewers when I took this screenshot. So all these people are paying a lot of attention to the Fed and their economic projections and what comes out of Jerome Powell's mouth. Even though in my previous video I went over how they don't control interest rate and their balance sheet doesn't matter mechanically. Psychologically it does, not mechanically. Because the stock market does not have 40 trillion because the balance sheet has gone up 2.3 trillion. 1.7 trillion of that increase is down to money supply. That's not the reason why the stock market has gone up that much. Okay? Anyways, that is not to talk about the stock market valuations. We're just going to talk about the economic data. So this is unemployment rate. This is U3. I went over what the difference between U3 and U6 is. U3 unemployment rate is national unemployment rate. U6 used to be the national unemployment rate before 1994. U3 is flawed, but it's flawed by design. If you're unemployed for 12 months or longer, you drop out of U3 unemployment rate. If you drive for Uber for 2 hours a week, you drop out of U3 unemployment rate, but you remain in U6. Wall Street cares about U6, not U3. So this is the Federal Reserve's economic projection for change in real GDP, unemployment rate, and core PCE inflation. First of all, let's go over GDP, which back in 2008, initially, they reported a 0.6% growth number that then got revised down to a 0.2% contraction, which then got revised multiple times for up to 10 years later. The GDP fell in Q4 2007, first drop since 2001. The non-farm payroll numbers and everything else also got revised. So GDP turned negative in 2008, which we know because we had the global financial crisis. So their forecast when it comes to this right here, the FOMC minutes from October 2007 was a complete miss because real GDP growth was not positive and it was for sure not growing at 1.8 to 2.5%. It contracted. After the revised numbers, this is what you got after. And then it got revised down more and more and more. The unemployment rate, 4.7 to 4.8 for 2007, right? But let's ignore that because this is from October 2007, so the year was almost over. What we care about is 2008 and 2009 and their forecast for unemployment rate, U3 in this case, and what it was going to do. The Federal Reserve, right here in October 2007, was telling you that the unemployment rate was going to stop here at 4.8 to 4.9, right there. What happened instead? It went parabolic. It doubled up to 10, and you had the global financial crisis. So at first glance, let me close down some things here. At first glance, it might look like their forecast isn't too bleak. But let me remind you of another thing. The unemployment rate, U3, bottomed at 3.4 right here. When I mouse over this, it's going to say the number right here. 3.4 was the low of this cycle in April of 2023. Ever since then, U3 unemployment rate has been trending up. What do you notice about the unemployment rate historically? Once it starts to curl up, it starts to spike and you go into a green zone, which is a recession. You see all these previous examples, okay? And I have written numbers here in these previous examples um, of how much it had to rise before you went into a recession, okay? So this one was 0.4% of a rise, you got a recession. 0.1% of a rise, you got a recession. 0.6% of a rise, you got a recession. 0.6% of a rise, you got a recession. 0.3, 0.5, 0.7, 0.5, 0.5, 0.4, 0.6 instantly. Currently we're up 0.7%. Ever since 1948, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 business cycles. This is not a business cycle playing out right here, but it's a recession. So we have 12 recessions here, 11 business cycles. Because I would argue we're still in the same business cycle right here. Okay? Because this was created by the government. We have never had this happen before where the government caused a recession by forcing everyone to stay at home. And they spiked the unemployment rate by themselves. There are no examples on this whole chart in any business cycle where the unemployment rate has risen by 0.7% and you were not in recession, which is consistent with the Fed telling us that GDP, which now the current estimate is 1.8% of a contraction. This is going to get updated again one more time, I think, at least. Yeah, on March 26th. So one more time before the quarter is over. So we have negative GDP. This was historically their forecast, and this is their forecast now. Should we pay attention to this number? And by the way, let me be clear. For 2025, right, they think this year it's going to go up to 4.4. That would be a what? 1% rise in unemployment rate, and it would look something like this. Do you spot any example in the past year where the unemployment rate has risen by 1% from the cycle low and you were not in recession? That has never happened. There are no examples of that. So if you want to believe that the Fed thinks we're not going to recession, how do you explain this? And you might say, yeah, but the unemployment rate is low. This is a terrible argument, okay? They were saying the same thing in 2008. In March 2008. If the economy is so bad, why is the unemployment rate so low? What did it look like back then? Don't make the same mistake that they were making back then. The unemployment rate was right here. So it had risen by this much. Well, now it has risen by a similar amount, 0.7%. I don't know how I know that. If we zoom in on this, okay? Again, if I mouse over the cycle lower, it's going to say 4.4. 4.4 was the bottom of the unemployment rate. By March 2008, the unemployment rate had risen to what? When I mouse over this, 5.1, a 0.7% rise in unemployment rate. And someone made the argument that if the economy is so bad, why is the unemployment rate so low? You can make the same argument today. The issue here is that it's not about the unemployment rate number, it's about the rate of change. Were things bad here in, let's say, 1998? No. But were they bad here when the unemployment rate was at the same level? Yes, because it was trending up. Here it was trending down. It's always about the rate of change. Why is the unemployment rate going up? Same thing right here. In 2008, it was really bad. The unemployment rate was right here. But were things really that bad in 2005? No, because it was trending down. Here it was trending up. Okay. When the unemployment rate is trending up, you have economic contraction, right? A recession is GDP contraction and unemployment rate rising. So why should I care about the Fed when this is the history of the Fed's projection? Okay. Well, I went over GDP, right? Which their forecast for GDP was a complete disaster. And also, here we're looking at PC inflation and core PC inflation. They're not bringing up the CPI in this case. But we can just look at what happened to the CPI. By July, again, 2008 CPI. In July 2008, year over year, the inflation rate was 5.6%. And you can see how much it rose during these months in the beginning of 2008, inside of the recession. Then this happened. You got these monthly readings of deflation. That's when the economy collapsed. And by July 2009, you had 2.1% deflation. Now, deflation is not something that's good. Okay? And I'm going to get back to this later as well. But again, Ben Bernanke, deflation, making sure it doesn't happen. November 2002, conclusion, sustained deflation can be highly destructive to a modern economy and should be strongly resisted. Right? So we, based off of just looking at this chart, right? There are no examples of where the unemployment rate rises like this, and especially not up to where the Fed is telling you it's going to be by the end of the year, which is 4.4, which is 1% above the low of the cycle. There are no examples of that without you being in a recession. There are no examples of that. Okay? So take everything that the Fed has to say with a grain of salt, and don't be like one of these 49,000 people who think that the Fed is the center of the monetary universe. They don't matter. They don't control interest rates. They follow the front end of the yield curve, in this case the 2-year yield. And their balance sheet can only be expanded if the Fed funds rate is at zero, which only happens if the bond market allows them to, and it's not very effective based on QE1 and QE4 and also QE in Japan from March 19, 2001. Study the history of QE and you'll see what I'm saying. I went over it in my previous videos. So, if we now go to the exact same chart as I went over in my previous video, right, where we have the Fed funds rate, Fed funds rate, the unemployment rate, and the stock market, turnover volume. Does it look to you like this is playing out in any different way than in the past? No, it looks the exact same as every single time. When this happens right here, unemployment in purple goes up, here it spiked, goes up, as interest rates in red is going down, going down, going down, going down, going down. The stock market rolls over and you get a green zone. Stock market rolls over, you get a green zone. Stock market rolls over, you get a green zone. Stock market rolls over, question mark, are you going to get a green zone? Well, based on the evidence that I've shared, it would seem so. And again, based off the yield curve and where we are in the cycle, it would also seem so. Where does the stock market historically struggle? It's right here. This is not my opinion. Okay? The stock market does not like the following. It's very clear. Okay? The stock market in red, in purple you have the unemployment rate, and regular candles is the 10-year, 2-year yield curve spread. The delta between a long-term interest rate minus a short-term interest rate. When this goes above the green horizontal line, which when it's below is the warning sign. When it goes above, unemployment spikes in purple, stock market sells off in red. Here is the warning sign. When it goes up, the stock market sells off in red, unemployment rate spikes in purple. Here's the warning sign. What happens when it comes out of inversion? Stock market sells off, unemployment rate spikes. Here's the warning sign. What happens when it comes out of inversion? The unemployment rate spikes, the stock market sells off. Here's the inversion. What happens when the unemployment rate, what happens when this goes above the neutral delta line? The unemployment rate goes up and the stock market, question mark, right? So you're at a point where it's undeniable. You have so many things pointing towards the same thing. And even the Federal Reserve is coming out and telling you that the unemployment rate is going to rise to a level that we have only seen, again, based on previous business cycles, you have only seen during economic contractions where the unemployment rate goes up. Okay? Now, you can think this time is different all you want. It doesn't really matter what you think. And it's about the rate of changes in the unemployment rate. Now, the second thing I want to go over is because they were talking a lot about, actually one thing before even going to the inflation thing, which is the last segment of this video. To quote the Fed, they said uncertainty around the economic outlook has increased. 2025 unemployment rate forecast has increased. Unemployment doesn't go up and then back down without a recession in between. You get a recession when it rises. That's how it works. Now, what I want to talk about is this tariff inflation. So, if your argument is that tariffs cause inflation, let me go to my Twitter. Tariffs cannot cause inflation. Here's why. Only a money supply expansion can cause inflation. If tariffs cause inflation, then you can have hyperinflation with a fixed money supply. If a consumer has $3,000 to spend, that's it. The demand for tariff goods equals lower demand for other goods and services. The general price level stays the same. The definition of inflation is to inflate something, in this case the money supply. Tariffs cause a price increase for certain goods. The general price level stays the same because the consumer didn't get more money. Therefore, you cannot get inflation from tariffs. Price increase is not the same as inflation. Inflation is increasing the amount of currency units in circulation, which increases the general price level. Tariffs is a price increase. It can be a temporary price increase, which equals higher price for certain goods, but that's not a general price level increase. There's three types of inflation: monetary inflation, which is expanding the amount of currency units in circulation; asset price inflation; consumer price index inflation. CPI is flawed, PC2. CPI is OER, which is owner's equivalent rent. It's hypothetical rent. It's one third of the basket. They call them up and they ask them, and then that's the CPI and it's speculative. Inflation has nothing to do with price increase in certain goods. It has to do with inflated money supply, which increases all prices. If I'm selling goods and I hike the prices up 10,000%, did that cause 10,000% inflation? No, that's not how it works. Nobody's going to buy it because it's unaffordable. They still have the same amount of money. Another problem, let's assume that tariffs cause inflation. If that was the case, then because it's temporary government policies, the moment they are removed, we should see deflation with that logic. But deflation is depressionary economics in a modern economy. And also, we cannot go and change something in the dictionary. In all dictionaries, inflation is the increase in the money supply. You are inflating something. And in this case, it's the money supply. Now, if your argument is that tariffs can cause inflation, then you can have hyperinflation with a fixed money supply, and in that case, then you can have severe deflation when they are, in this case, removed, right? You can't have it both ways. And what would that imply? Deflation, making sure it doesn't happen here. November 2002 by Ben Bernanke, speech by Ben Bernanke. Okay, as I said, sustained deflation can be highly destructive to a modern economy and should be strongly resisted. Tariffs are not inflationary, it's a price increase. That's not the same as inflation. That's a fallacy. It's just like with the Fed controlling interest rates, which they don't, they follow the front end of the yield curve. Just like their balance sheet apparently matters so much, it doesn't. I went over why it doesn't. Mechanically, psychologically, it does. I think most people are lost and they don't question things and they think the Fed knows everything, right? They have 785 PhDs. I think they're very sophisticated, by the way. Let me be clear. But I don't think they're telling you the truth. That's all this video is about. Take care. Enjoy. Peace.